Imagine waking up on a warm summer morning in 1992 in the quiet city of Springfield, Missouri. You grab your coffee, glance at the local news, and hear something that makes you stop in your tracks. 3 women, 2 young friends fresh out of high school and a devoted mother, have vanished from their home. No broken doors, no ransom notes, no signs of a struggle. Just gone. This isn't the plot of a novel. It's a real case. And more than 30 years later, it remains one of Missouri's most haunting unsolved mysteries. People here still refer to them simply as the Springfield Three. Their names were Suzanne Suzie Streeter, just 19 years old, Stacy McCall, 18, and Sherrill Levitt, Suzie's 47-year-old mother. On the night of June 6, 1992, they were where they were supposed to be, at home. By the next morning, they had disappeared without a trace. For the families, that day never ended. For the community, the questions have never stopped. Tonight, we're going to walk through this story step by step, looking at what happened, what's been confirmed, and the theories that have kept investigators and armchair detectives searching for answers for decades. We're not here to sensationalize. Every detail you'll hear comes from verified public records, law enforcement reports, and respected news sources. As you listen, keep this in mind. Springfield in 1992 was not the kind of place where people locked their doors. Neighbors waved from their porches. Kids rode their bikes until the streetlights came on. This wasn't supposed to happen here. And yet it did. How could 3 women vanish from a home in the middle of the night, without leaving behind a single clear clue? Could the answer be hidden in the smallest overlooked detail? Or is it possible the truth has been in plain sight all along? Let's start from the beginning. Before we get into the timeline, it's important to know who these women were. Because behind every headline, there are real lives. And in this case, 3 of them. Let's start with Sherrill Levitt. At 47, Sherrill was known as dependable, independent, and hardworking. She had built a comfortable life for herself in a modest 1-story home at 1717 East Delmar Street. After a divorce, she focused on her career as a hairdresser, working out of a local salon. Friends described her as someone who cared about appearances, not out of vanity, but because she believed in presenting yourself well to the world. She was in the middle of some home improvements, the kind of small projects that showed she was looking toward the future. Her relationship with her daughter Suzie was close. They weren't just mother and daughter, they were friends. Suzanne Suzie Streeter, Sherrill's only child, had just turned 19. On June 6th, the day before the disappearance, she graduated from Kickapoo High School. Suzie was outgoing, a little stubborn, and fiercely loyal to her friends. She planned to follow in her mother's footsteps and study cosmetology. Like many teenagers, she had moments of rebellion. There had been a minor scrape with the law, a prank involving a cemetery and some stolen items with a boyfriend at the time, but nothing that marked her as dangerous or troubled. Those who knew her say she had a big heart and wasn't afraid to speak her mind. Then there was Stacy McCall, 18, Suzie's close friend and fellow graduate from Kickapoo High. Stacy had a reputation for being kind, reliable, and grounded. She lived with her parents in Springfield, and on the night of June 6th, she and Suzie had planned to spend the night at another friend's house after a string of graduation parties. But somewhere along the way, plans changed. Instead of staying elsewhere, they decided to go back to Suzie's house to sleep. It was supposed to be just another end-of-high-school memory. 2 friends, tired after a long night of celebrating, staying over at a familiar, safe home. These 3 women didn't live dangerous lives. They weren't connected to gangs or drugs. They were ordinary people in an ordinary neighborhood. And that's part of what makes this case so unsettling. Because if it could happen to them, there's one more detail that's important to remember as we go through this story. This wasn't a remote farmhouse miles from the nearest neighbor. This was a home in a city neighborhood, with houses nearby, people awake late into the night, and the usual summer noises carrying down the street. Yet somehow, between the late hours of June 6th and the morning of June 7th, all 3 vanished. And the only way to really understand how strange that is to look at exactly what happened in those final known hours. The day of June 6th, 1992, started out like a celebration. For Suzie Streeter and Stacy McCall, it was graduation day from Kickapoo High School. Friends, family, and a string of parties marked the occasion. Both young women were looking forward to summer before starting the next chapter of their lives. That evening, they attended a large graduation gathering in Battlefield, Missouri. Later, they headed to another celebration in Branson. By the time they left the Branson party, it was late, close to 2 in the morning on June 7th. Originally, the plan had been to spend the night at a friend's house. But that friend's home was crowded with other overnight guests. So, Stacy and Suzie made a quick decision. They'd go to Suzie's house instead, where her mother Sherrill was already in for the night. Around 2:15 a.m., they arrived at 1717 East Delmar Street. Sherrill had last been heard from at about 11:15 p.m. the night before, when she spoke to a friend on the phone. What happened next is where the mystery begins. By the next morning, June 7th, phone calls to the house went unanswered. A few of the girls' friends, planning to meet up for a trip to a water park, stopped by the Levitt home around 9 a.m. They found all 3 cars parked outside: Sherrill's blue Corsica, Suzie's red Ford Escort, and Stacy's Toyota Corolla. Inside, the front door was unlocked. The television was on, and the house looked mostly undisturbed. The women's purses, along with their money, keys, and cigarettes, were still inside. Even their clothes from the night before were neatly folded. The only living thing there was Sherrill's small Yorkshire Terrier, who seemed anxious. There was no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass. The only odd physical clue was a shattered porch light globe outside. It was unclear whether it had been broken that night or sometime earlier. The friends who came by did something that, in hindsight, may have complicated the investigation. They cleaned up the broken glass on the porch, thinking they were helping. They also went in and out of the house, answering the phone and even tidying up in places. One of them remembers hearing a strange voicemail, something odd enough that it stuck in their memory, but that message was later accidentally erased before police could hear it. By midday, family members and more friends had gathered at the house, all worried. Eventually, the Springfield police were called. From the start, investigators had almost nothing to work with. No one had seen the women leave. No one had reported hearing screams or unusual noises during the night. Neighbors hadn't noticed anything suspicious, except, possibly, for a green van parked nearby in the early morning hours. That sighting would later become one of the most talked-about leads in the case. But at that moment, on June 7th, there were only questions. How could 3 women vanish from their home without leaving behind a single clear clue? Was it someone they knew? Or a stranger who happened to strike at exactly the right time? Those unanswered questions would launch an investigation that stretched for decades. And while the case remains unsolved, the early hours of that Sunday morning still hold the key. If only someone could see the detail everyone else has missed. When Springfield police finally stepped into the Levitt home on June 7th, valuable time had already slipped away. Friends and family, acting out of concern, had been in and out of the house for hours. They had touched doorknobs, moved items, even cleaned up the glass from the broken porch light. No one could have known it at the time, but in doing so, the crime scene had been disturbed. That meant that from the very start, investigators were working at a disadvantage. Any fingerprints, footprints, or small traces left behind might have been smudged, moved, or completely erased. Police did a thorough sweep of the property. They found no signs of forced entry. No strange fingerprints. Nothing that clearly pointed to a struggle. Inside the house, everything looked almost too normal. The women's cars were still there. Their purses, keys, and personal items hadn't been touched. Even Sherrill's cigarettes were in place, something friends said she wouldn't have left without. The one detail that stood out was the strange voicemail one friend had heard earlier that morning. A message they described as unsettling. But before police could hear it, it was gone. Accidentally deleted. Whatever that voice said, it's lost forever. Then came the reports about a green van. Several people mentioned seeing one parked near the Levitt home in the early morning hours of June 7th. One witness claimed they saw a man driving it who looked like he was trying not to be noticed. But despite follow-up interviews, police could never connect the van, or its driver, to the disappearance. Investigators looked into people who might have had a reason to harm any of the women. One name that came up was Suzie's former boyfriend, Mike Clay. He'd been involved in that earlier cemetery incident with Suzie, but police didn't find evidence linking him to the disappearance. Another name, one that would stick with the case for years, was Robert Craig Cox. Cox was a convicted kidnapper and suspected murderer, living in Springfield at the time. He had once worked for a roofing company in the area. Years later, while in prison for an unrelated crime, Cox claimed he knew what had happened to the Springfield Three. But he refused to give details, saying the bodies would never be found. Investigators pressed him, But without proof, his claims were just that, claims. Search efforts were massive. Law enforcement, volunteers, and even the FBI got involved. They scoured wooded areas, drained ponds, and followed hundreds of tips. At one point, police dug up parts of a local hospital parking garage after a tip suggested the women's bodies had been buried in its foundation during construction. That search came up empty. Over the years, more than 5,000 leads have been investigated. The case file has grown into stacks of binders, filled with interviews, evidence logs, and maps of search areas. Yet not one lead has led to a confirmed breakthrough. Technology has advanced since 1992. DNA testing is far more sophisticated now. Cold case units across the country have solved decades-old crimes with just a trace of genetic material. But in the case of the Springfield Three, there's a painful truth. If there's no preserved evidence to test, even the best technology can't provide answers. As of 2025, the case remains open. The reward for information leading to an arrest stands at $42,000. Springfield police continue to urge anyone with knowledge, even something they think might be insignificant, to come forward. Because sometimes, in cases like this, it's the smallest overlooked detail that breaks everything open. And that's the thing about the disappearance of the Springfield Three. There's no shortage of theories. Some make sense on paper. Others feel far-fetched. But until there's evidence, they're all just possibilities. So what are the theories? And which ones have kept this case alive in the minds of investigators and the public for more than 3 decades? That's where we go next. When a case goes unsolved for more than 30 years, theories start to pile up. Some come from police work, others from the public, and a few from pure speculation. Now, before we get into them, it's important to be clear. These are just theories. They are not confirmed facts. They are possibilities investigators have considered, chased, and in many cases, been forced to set aside for lack of proof. Theory 1 points to the possibility of a local drug or criminal connection. This one often comes up because Suzie had recently been a witness in a case involving the vandalism of a cemetery, specifically the theft of gold teeth from corpses. It was a bizarre, unsettling incident, and some have wondered whether someone involved in that case might have wanted revenge. But law enforcement has never found concrete evidence linking that event to the disappearance. And many who knew Suzie believe it's unlikely such a petty crime could escalate to the abduction of 3 women. Theory 2 focuses on a random sexual predator. This is where the name Robert Craig Cox enters the conversation again. Cox was in Springfield at the time, had a violent history, and had once been convicted of kidnapping and assaulting a woman in Florida. He later hinted that he knew what had happened to Suzie, Stacy, and Sherrill. He even claimed they were dead, but refused to say where they were. Some investigators think he was simply seeking attention. Others believe he might have been telling the truth. But without evidence, no DNA, no witnesses, nothing ties him directly to the crime. Theory 3 suggests the disappearance may have stemmed from a personal dispute. Sherrill had recently gone through a divorce, and like many divorces, there were tensions. Could someone from her past have targeted her? And by extension, her daughter and Stacy? Investigators looked into it. But again, no sign of a struggle, no forced entry, no threatening messages. Just an idea without a trail to follow. Then there are the missed or unresolved leads. Fragments that still bother both police and the public. There's the strange voicemail. Friends described it as unsettling, maybe even frightening. But it was accidentally erased before anyone in law enforcement could hear it. That could have been the key to understanding what happened that night. Or it could have been nothing. We'll never know. There's the green van, spotted by more than one witness in the early morning hours. It seemed out of place in the quiet neighborhood, but by the time police learned of it, the van was long gone. And of course, there's the rumor about the women being buried beneath the concrete of a hospital parking garage. This came from a tip years later, claiming the bodies had been hidden during construction. Police brought in ground-penetrating radar. They dug, and they found nothing. The frustrating part is that each of these leads feels like it could be important. But without that one piece of confirming evidence, they remain what they've always been, unanswered questions. The truth is, no single theory has ever risen above the others. None has been proven. That's why, as of today, the disappearance of the Springfield Three remains one of America's most haunting cold cases. And maybe that's what keeps people talking about it. 3 women, gone without a trace. A house that looks almost exactly as they left it. And a case file filled with more what-ifs than answers. So, what do you think? Could this have been a targeted act by someone they knew? A crime of opportunity by a stranger? Or something none of us have even considered yet? Because until someone talks, or until some forgotten piece of evidence turns up, the truth is still out there. It's been 33 years. 3 women, Sherrill Levitt, her daughter Suzie Streeter, and friend Stacy McCall, vanished in the middle of the night. And in all that time, not a single confirmed trace of them has ever been found. The case of the Springfield Three is still open, still active, and still a wound in the heart of Missouri. Over the years, the world of investigation has changed. New forensic techniques, advanced DNA analysis, even artificial intelligence are giving fresh life to old files. There's hope that one day, these tools might shine a light on what really happened in that quiet home on Delmar Street. For the families, the waiting never stops. Birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, they pass without answers. But also without giving up. The people of Springfield haven't forgotten either. Candlelight vigils still happen. The women's faces are still on flyers, on websites, in conversations among neighbors. And maybe that's the key to keeping their story alive. Because sometimes it's one memory, one small detail someone overlooked, one moment of courage to finally speak up. That's all it takes to break a case wide open. So if you know anything, no matter how small it might seem, please contact the Springfield Police Department at 417-864-1810 or the FBI. The story of the Springfield Three is more than a mystery. It's a reminder. A reminder that truth can hide for decades, but it never disappears completely. That answers are sometimes buried in the tiniest details. And that justice depends on all of us choosing not to stay silent. Thank you for following this journey with me. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. Because somewhere out there, someone knows the truth.